Hi, and welcome to Lesson 4. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at fractions to decimals to percents. Now, we learned in the last lesson what a fraction was, and I want to start there. So let's take a fraction that most of us are quite comfortable with. Let's take the fraction 1/2. And we're going to write it as a decimal, and I believe that most people are comfortable with 1/2 is the same as the decimal of 0.5. So the question is how do we go from the fraction to the decimal? And the answer is division. So let me show you. We always take the top number and divide it by the bottom number. So if I was to take 1/2, it's the same as 1. And if you use a calculator, type 1 divided by 2 and then press equal, and you'll come up with 0.5. Another example might be if you have the fraction of, let's try 1/8. If you have the fraction of 1/8, well, that means you take 1, you divide it by 8, and the answer is 0.125. Let's try something a little bit different. So let's try something like this. Let's try 2 divided by 8. Now, there's a couple ways you might come up with this. One thing you might do is you might notice that 2/8 is the same as 2 times 1 over 2 times 4. And so you could cancel the 2's, and then you realize that you're left with the fraction of 1/4. So now you can do two different things. Let's go back to where we started. If we take 2/8, this means 2 divided by 8, and if you put that into your calculator, you should come up with 0.25, a quarter. And let's see if that works the same with 1/4. If we take 1/4, we take 1, and we divide it by 4, and we do get 0.25. And just to show you this, and if you have a calculator, you should stop and take a moment and do the same thing yourself. But here's a calculator that I really like. It's called Good Grapher. So let's take 2, then we're going to divide it by 8, and I press equals, and there's my result, 0.25. And then also notice that if we take 1 divided by 4, we get the same result. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you, and that is this. If I switch the order, so let's go back to where we were. If I was to switch the order, and if I gave you the fraction of 8 over 2, well, this means 8 divided by 2. Well, let's see if that's the same as 0.25. So if we go to Good Grapher again, we type 8, and then divided by 2, notice now we get 4. So the point of that is very simple. It is that the order of the division numbers matter. It's always the top number divided by the bottom number. All right, let's go back to where we were, and we just found that 8 divided by 2 is 4. So that's the pattern. It's always the top number divided by the bottom number. Let's try one more. Actually, let's try 2 more. Let's try this. What about the fraction of 2/3? Well, if you put this in your calculator, you come up with 0. And then the 6's go on forever. And what happens eventually is the calculator can't display any more digits, and so it probably gives you a 7. Well, what we can do, and actually, we're going to come back to this in a moment, but since the 6's go on forever, what we can do is instead of writing that last 7, and we really don't even have to write all those 6's, you could just write ... that they go on forever, or you can use the notation of 0.6, and then you put a bar over it, and that means that the 6 goes on forever in that pattern. And let's take a look here. Let's take a look. We go back to Good Grapher, we have, if we go back to good grapher, if we take 2, divide it by 3, and there's our repeating 6 pattern. Okay, so let's go back to our notes. Oh, whoops. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're back to our notes, and let's try one more. Let's try the fraction now of, let's try 2 11ths. 2 11ths. Now watch what happens when you put this one into your calculator. You're going to go 2 divided by 11, and notice the pattern. It's 1 8, 1 8, 1 8, 1 8, and that pattern continues on forever. So what we want to do here is, this is the same as 0 point. You could write 1 8, 1 8, and then dot dot dot, or you could just write 0 point, and then since it's the 1 8 that repeats, you'd put a bar over the 1 8. Okay, now let's take a look at something here, and I'm going to use this example. Let's go back to the fraction of 3/16. Oh, I don't think we did 3/16. So let's try this. 3/16, if I put this in my calculator, is 3 divided by 16. I get 0.1875. Okay, here we go. So I get 0.1875. Okay, this is called an exact answer. And the reason is because you can write all of the decimals that make up the number. Exact answer because all parts of the decimal can be written. Now, but sometimes that is not the case. So let's say that brings us to what we call rounding. And we're going to round our 3/16. So let's see how we do that. We're going to round 3/16. So we're going to round 3/16 to, the first one we're going to do is let's take just a quick reminder here, is the place values here. The first decimal is called the tenths. The second position here, the second position is the hundredths. Oops, let me clear this up a little bit. These are the hundredths. The 7, this is in the thousandths position. And then the 5, this is in the 10,000ths position. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Since 3/16 ends in the 10,000ths, let's round it to the nearest thousandth. Then we'll round it to the nearest hundredth, and then we'll even round it to the nearest tenth, and that's as far as we can go. So here we go. Let's do this. Yeah, all right, so round 2, we're going to do round 2 the thousandths. Hundredths. And tenths. All right, let's take a look. So if I start out with this 3/16, okay, it equals 0.1875. 0.775. Now, if I'm going to round it to the thousands, what I do is I take a look at the number in the thousandths position, the 7. And then I look to the right. Well, when I look to the right, I see a 5. So if I see a 5, a 6, a 7, 8, or a 9, then what I do is I increase the 7 by 1. But notice that I'm actually changing the number just slightly. So instead of writing equals, I write an approximation sign. That's the squiggly equal. So I have 0.18. The 7 increases by 1 to become an 8. And so this would be to the thousandths. All right, let's try again. If we take 3/16 and we want to round it to the hundredths, well, it starts out as 0.1875. Now, let's take a look. The hundredths, 8 is in the 100ths position. So I look to the right and I see a 7. And just like above, since it's 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, I increase the 8 by 1. So this becomes 0.1. And then the 8 actually increases to a 9. And finally, when we round 3/16 to the nearest tenth, let's do that. 0.1875. Well, my 1 is in the tenths position, and to the right of it is the 8. So again, since it's between 5 and 9, I increase the 1 to a 2. And to the nearest tenth, 3/16 is 0.2. Now let's take a look at one more example. Here's a number that people are kind of a famous number. It's the number pi. And the exact answer of pi is just this. It's the symbol pi. And the reason is because pi continues forever. It's 3.1415926. Then I think it's like 35 or something, but it continues and on and on and on. And the pattern never repeats. So let's round pi. Let's round pi to the nearest hundredth. This is the most common approximation. So we're going to round pi to the hundredths. Okay, so when we do this, that means we're going to round the 4. So we look to the right and we have a 1. And here's the rule. If to the right we have a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4, then what we do is we just drop the rest of the numbers, or they become 0 is another way of thinking of it. So pi can be rounded to 3.14, and then all the numbers. So what we do is the 4, it stays the same. And so then all the rest of those numbers just become zeros. And then when we have just zeros on the decimal that continue out forever, we don't write those. And so the easiest way to write it is pi is approximately 3.14. And that is how we round. And we're going to stop the video here, and in the next one we're going to look at how we take fractions to decimals and finally to percents. Thanks for watching.